There we go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Carla Fuller, and I serve as an educational specialist here at HSLDA. Today, I am joined by the founder of Homeschool OT, occupational therapist and homeschool mom, Sarah Collins, and my colleague, Sherry Kay Sessions, who is also a homeschool mom and is a pediatric physical therapist. So today, we're going to discuss homeschooling through trauma. And by trauma, we mean significant life events like the loss of a loved one, a natural disaster, any life altering illness, and more. And you can find more resources at hslda.org/suddenly homeschooling if you're new to homeschooling, or you can go to hslda.org/getting started, and you can find a lot of resources there. And we should have those links in the chat for you. So I want to quickly invite everyone as you're coming in to let us know where you're watching from. We'd love for this time to be interactive so that we can address your questions or any of your comments. Something that we talk about might spark something in you, and we certainly want to hear about that. So please put your thoughts in the comments in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can during our time today. So let's see. I don't see anybody. Oh, hi. We see Vanessa from Texas. That's very good. And we see Christy. Hello, good afternoon to you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started as people come in. So we all know the last 6 months have been really hard, right? The hurricane season brought so much destruction to many areas in the Southeast, and then all the way up through into North Carolina. And then January with the fires that brought so much loss in Los Angeles. So many families have been impacted. They've been displaced. Many have lost everything. And those are the big stories that we, see in the news. But we all know that there are others who are quietly experiencing other forms of loss and life disrupting events. And so I'd like us to start by addressing two important questions as you all come and get settled in with us. And one of them is, what are some truths that we can grasp and hold on to as we navigate this season? Sarah, what are your initial thoughts as we get started
So,
today?
yeah, for sure. So I think that there's several truths that we can go for. First of all, every single person's story is different, right? That's
Mhm.
like there's not one single thing that holds true to everybody besides faith. Other than that, we're going to move forward, but there also is not one right way to suffer. So
Mm,
as we're thinking about trauma, as we're going through, we have to recognize that every person's story, so meaning within the person, so all of our brains are wired differently.
mhm,
There is a more typical way, but there's also, not the whole group is not wired in the same way,
mhm. That's
right?
right.
We
Mhm.
also have to recognize everybody's environments are different. So, what their background is, where they're living, where
That's
their
right.
story is taking place, that's
Mhm.
different.
That's
And
right.
what they need and want to do is all different. So, our truth
Mm.
is basically that we're all different and there's not
Yeah.
one right way to do this.
Mhm.
So as we're talking and giving tips and really thinking through like how to handle a situation, there isn't one right way to do it. So we need to give
Mm.
grace and peace like as we're thinking through all of it.
Yeah, that's very, very freeing because I think sometimes it's like, I'm doing this wrong, or people
Yeah.
get panicky about that when they're in the midst of crisis. So I think that's really important. Sherry Kay, what would be some important truths you like to make sure that people hold on to?
Yeah, I think that all that Sarah had to say was spot on. And just to
Mhm.
piggyback off that a little bit, is that what might be hard for me might not be
Mhm.
hard for Sarah. So even though,
Mhm.
like Sarah said, we're all different. So what we consider a trauma or what we consider a hard time or a life altering event may not be one for me,
Mhm.
but maybe one for somebody else. So I think that that's important to give that that grace and that space for when somebody says this is hard, to believe them
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
not
Yeah,
say, well, it's not that big of a deal,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Where I've been
Because
through worse. Like
yeah,
exactly.
oh
Oh,
yes,
that's nothing. Wait till
absolutely.
you hear
That's
what I
right.
just
that's
went through.
so
Exactly. Yeah.
hurtful. Yeah, that's so hurtful. So I think that that's a big thing is to know that when you are going through something hard, that if you feel it's hard, it's actually hard.
Yeah.
and to
Yeah,
give
very
yourself
good.
that space to
That's
feel it hard.
that space. Yeah, yeah. I think what it reminds
Yeah.
me of is the saying that you're either in a crisis, you're coming out of a crisis, or you're heading into one. I don't know if either of you have ever heard that before. And I know for me, when I first began homeschooling, I confess I believed that life would just stop. It would allow me to homeschool our sons with no interruptions and no problems, and everything will be wonderful. And I was shocked when we had a lot of difficulties to deal with. Like, wait a minute,
When the
I'm
rest
trying
of
to
the world
homeschool my kids.
continued, right?
Exactly. Yeah, but for us, we would be in this bubble, and that's just not how life works. We had a lot of difficulties during that time. For us, particularly, it was loss.
Mhm.
What did happen, though, instead of being devastating, is that we built deep bonds, right, in our relationships as we
Yeah.
navigated those hard times. We were able to put first things first. And sometimes the task for us was to rethink academics and to reevaluate what good enough was during those
Mhm.
seasons, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, can you relate to that? You're both shaking your nodding your heads. Yes, yeah. Um, and then the other question to get us started is, what are some strategies that parents can utilize during this phase of life? So we know that these things happen, but what are some specific strategies that parents can begin to put into their tool belt to help them? Sherry Kay, you want to start us off with that question?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest strategies for me was always that word grace. And
Mm,
I say
mhm,
this on a lot of our lives and webinars
mhm,
that um, sometimes I give myself grace, sometimes I give my child grace, sometimes I give my kitchen grace. Like
mhm.
to have the space open. Sometimes the curriculum gets some grace. You know what I mean? Like you just be
Right.
able to, you, I'm a perfectionist, right?
Mm,
By nature, and homeschooling has actually taken me away from that a little bit,
Mhm.
to be able
mhm.
to say it's okay that I don't do every single thing every single perfect way
Yes.
every single day, like all that stuff. And so I think that one of the biggest strategies first is to step back and say it's okay. It's
Mhm,
okay if we take today off. It's okay if we only do one subject. It's okay. um
mhm.
and I think people are afraid to do that. I know I was afraid to do that.
Sure.
And I hear that a lot from families. So I think that's kind of my first step when things are kind of hard, is to
Mhm,
go ahead and say, it's okay.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important. Sarah, did you have thoughts about that as well?
I do, for sure. So coming at this from an occupational therapy perspective, I
Mhm,
often am thinking, and I mentioned kind of the person and the environment, and then what you need and want to do, or
mhm.
it's how you occupy your time. That's what an occupation is.
Right.
So when I think through the person, right, who is going through whatever it is, and, trauma, again, like what we said, is defined in lots of many different ways depending on the person.
Mhm. Right.
um, I want to think about how our brains and bodies are organized and how they are. And when I say organized, I mean regulated,
Mhm,
so
mhm.
that we
Hmm.
can take in all of the information around us
Right.
and then organize that into an output, right? So
Mhm,
we can take in whatever through what we're seeing, through what we're hearing, tasting, feeling, all of that, and then be able to organize it.
mhm.
Now, oftentimes when we're going through hard things, that's what's taking up a lot of our brain space, and so it's
Absolutely.
really, really hard to then stay what we refer to in the OT world as regulated.
Exactly.
So, there are some really important steps of, Sherry, when you were mentioning, like, we need to take, have some grace and say, "Maybe I don't need to get this done today." I would even go as far as saying, asking myself the question of, if I don't have enough brain space, or if my children don't, are they actually gonna be learning if I'm putting the time and effort there?
That's
Or
right.
is it more effective if we put our time and effort into the regulating our bodies?
Mhm.
So, now we need to think about, how do we do that? And
Right.
I mean, this is also different based on your environment, what you have on hand, what your kids are, how
What you're working
what
with.
actually
Mhm,
works for them.
mhm.
However, the number one is typically what we call proprioception, or heavy work is another word for that. It's where you are giving your body enough information as to where it is and what it's doing, that then it can calm and take in all that sensory input.
Mhm.
So, like, for example, if you think about when you get hurt, right? The first thing you do is, like, let's say I cut my
Grab.
arm, the first
Yeah.
thing you do is grab
Right.
it, right? Because
Mhm.
you're sending your brain information to calm
That
your body,
signal. Mhm.
right? Or if you're really stressed out, a lot of people wrap up in a blanket, or you want to lay down, want to get under it. You're trying to get in smaller spaces. Your body's naturally looking for that proprioception.
Mhm.
So, one way to help to calm is to seek that out. You can do
Mhm.
that anything that is crawling. Sherry, I'm sure you have a lot of examples of this, but crawling,
Mhm.
carrying, pushing, pulling, like
Mhm.
all of those things that you can do through your day to day life, whether you're carrying the laundry basket or you're crawling on the floor with your kids or you're climbing a tree outside, right? These are all ways to help to calm and organize the body so that then you can proceed with learning. But without it,
Mhm.
if you're not, it's so much harder to focus and to learn.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's really
Absolutely.
important. Yeah. So and it's clear, right, that this new season of life may cause disruption in your child's
Mhm.
education, and we're talking about why that is, Sarah, so thank you for that. And so some of you may be looking at homeschooling as a temporary solution just for the time being. For parents who are just getting started, what is some helpful advice that you can give our first-time homeschooling parents, those who may be doing this temporarily? Sarah, what's your advice for them? We're
I
just gonna
kind
get
of
through this crisis, we're
right.
homeschooling right now. Mhm,
Yeah. I think a big piece of it is what I was just talking about, is making sure that everybody has the freedom of movement. Like, you can
mhm.
think to yourself, wow, we are home every day. I don't need to, or well, homeschooling doesn't mean that you're always in your home. We all know that.
Right,
But
right, right,
you are not confined to between 9 and 3 to get,
right.
your day done. So you can really set aside times of your day that you can think about, all right, how is this moving, and
Mhm,
what are my kids needs right now, how can I connect with them, and
mhm,
what is, moving outside or moving inside, what are some ways we can get that done throughout our day.
mhm,
I also think coming up with some anchor points to your day. So if you think about, if by the end of the day you are on decision fatigue, right? So you've had to make all these decisions all day long. Johnny needs something in the kitchen now that he didn't need 5 minutes ago. And so now we have to change what we were doing before. Or, I just wanted to get through math and somebody else needs me, and,
mhm,
someone's pulling my pit, whatever. Like, there are
mhm.
continuous disruptions.
Right.
So if you do have some anchor points, things that are always the same so that you don't have to be flexible in those moments,
Mhm,
that predictability can actually add or allow you to be more flexible, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
does. It does. So
Mhm.
we have
Mhm.
Stasia in the chat, and she says she has 4 boys, one, first grade, a child with Down syndrome, he's about 2nd, 3rd grade, a 7th grade, and a high schooler, who is a boy. She says he's behind due to family crisis. And, we're gonna talk about that, in a bit, what that behind means. So Stasia, if
Mhm.
you have a specific question about your situation, we thank you for being here with us. And anyone else who may be here and has a thought or a question for us, please let us know. Um, Sherry Kate, what are your thoughts for those who are they're homeschooling temporarily? What's your advice for them as they get started?
Yeah, I don't want to sound cliche, but the very first thing you need to do is look at your state laws and make sure
Mm,
that you're within those laws. So you can find that on HSLDA's website.
mm,
If you're a member of HSLDA, you can call and talk to one of our legal team. But it's very helpful, and I say that because that's what I did. I homeschooled. I started during a crisis, and to know all of us moms walk around with, "Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing this
mhm,
right?" And that will give you the very basic foundation to know that you are doing it right. This is
mhm,
what you need to do, because most of the time it's not as complicated as we might want to make it.
right.
Right? We
Right.
often complicate things and put more stress on ourselves in a time of chaos, and we don't need to do that. So check out those homeschool laws, and then know that you are doing it right by
Mhm,
following those guidelines that are set forth for you.
mhm,
Um, And then, like Sarah said, you're not confined to 9 to 3 or 8 to 3 or whatever.
Mhm.
And I would also like to add to that, you're also not confined to once you start, you have to keep going until you end. You
Right.
Mm.
can homeschool in 10-minute increments or 15-minute increments, or you don't have to sit at a table. You're not, oh my gosh, we can't start now because I'm going to get interrupted in 20 minutes. That's okay. Do 10 minutes. You're
Mhm.
good. And then you'll do 10 minutes later. So, I'd like to just give that flexibility to you, give you that
Mhm.
permission to
Yeah.
not have to do, well, once we start, we have to go until we finish.
Yeah, I think that's a really important paradigm shift that parents who are coming out of a, traditional school environment,
Mhm.
that's what everybody's used to. We were all mostly educated in that way. Our children have been educated in that way. So it really is a paradigm shift to say, wait, sometimes with that freedom comes, some difficulty as well, like, oh my goodness, how do I do this? But if you embrace it, it really can be a gift to say, wow, I really don't have to sit here all day with my kids. We can
Yes.
do it with the rhythm of our family. And in a crisis, the
Mhm.
rhythm of your family may look different. Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the other things I would recommend is for those who know, you're pretty sure that you're going to go back into a traditional environment, is to consult your school district to determine what your children will need to re-enroll. And this is especially true for high schoolers because they're
Mhm.
building credits toward graduation requirements. And so you want to make sure that you do that ahead of time. And as we're talking, we always want to remind you to let us know what your thoughts are. Anna says, it's hard to homeschool through family crisis. Just take
Mhm.
one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour, or even 1 minute at a time.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think,
Mhm.
Sarah, what you were alluding to is that the brain only has the capacity for so much at any one time
Mhm.
anyway, right? Correct?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And
Exactly.
we are for taking in information all day long, every day through
Mhm.
our bodies and our senses. And so
Mhm.
if that is what's taking up the majority of the space, just getting through like 1 minute at a time, then you're
Yeah.
right. Adding in extra, man, I also have to get this done and I also have to get this
Right.
done. And what comes next? It gets harder
Mhm.
and harder and
Yeah.
harder. So, yeah, absolutely, Anna. Take
Absolutely.
it 1 minute at a time and
Mhm.
do what
Yeah.
you can and what your body needs. Now, that does require, though, you to know what your body needs. And a
Mm.
lot of times when we're homeschooling through crisis, our kids don't know.
No.
They have
Mhm.
no idea what they need. They just know that something is not right.
That's right. Mhm.
So,
Sarah,
oh,
Sarah,
go ahead.
what that's okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask you, what kinds of things can parents be aware of while they're watching their children in those kind of yellow flags that their child might be about to lose it, right? Because sometimes
Mhm.
we homeschool until we're in a full-on tantrum, and then we say,
Mhm.
my kid just tantrums when I try to do whatever, whatever. So, what might be some of those like cues that a family or somebody needs to take a break before the
Before,
meltdown
yeah.
so that we can continue to enjoy our homeschool?
Right? Yeah. So now you guys are going to know your children best. So I'm going to give like some kind of generic things, but you also are going to be like, yeah, my child does this, right? um,
Mhm.
but I do want to say, before I start labeling those, it is important to be communicating with your kids of, I notice, I see this type of thing happening, so that
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
can start to recognize it in themselves as well. So it's
Absolutely.
not, where you're telling them, wait, you're doing this, and
Mhm.
every time be they're about to have a meltdown, and then they are, right, because you're
Right.
telling them something that you're
And then
noticing is
becomes a
what you want them
conflict.
to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if instead we have a natural communication system, and there's a few that you can use that are kind of published. One is, oh my gosh, why isn't that coming to mind? The alert program. There we go. It's called How Does Your
Mhm.
Engine Run? And it
Mm.
kind of
Oh, yeah.
relates your body and your sensory system to things like, it started with trains or cars. So meaning like
Mhm.
I'm really sluggish, like
Mm.
a caboose, or
Right.
I am like, chugging along like a regular steam engine, or I am going so fast like a bullet train, right? You can
Mhm.
do it related to any. I had a family who used Disney princesses. I think they were fluttering around like I don't know, asleep, they were Sleeping Beauty and
Mhm.
Tinkerbell maybe, and I don't know, or Snow White and then Tinkerbell, they were fluttering around, like maybe that was what it was. But it's whatever's going to work in with your family to kind
Mhm.
of be able to say how their body is at that moment in time. Another is called the zones of regulation, where
Mhm.
it's kind of equated to a to different colors.
Right.
So blue zone is where you're really sluggish,
Mhm.
or you're sleepy, or you're also just feeling unmotivated and having a hard time getting started. Um,
Mhm.
Green is like you're in this zone of alertness, you're ready, like that's when our math is happening, right? Our
Mhm.
yellow
Mhm.
is Sherry, what you were talking about, where we're at the cusp here, we're getting close to where that meltdown is going to be, you are having a hard time taking anything in.
Mhm.
And then red is total meltdown city.
Mhm.
So if we can have a language for that all of the time, like, hey, I see you're in the green zone, do you know how I can tell? Because you're looking at me. Or I mean, that's an eye contact thing, not everybody is feels comfortable with eye contact, but if your child does, like, I can tell you're looking right at me, you're sitting upright, you are, you're breathing at a really fast rate, or at a normal rate for you, not fast,
Right.
your
Right.
shoulders are back, right? Whatever it is that you
Sure.
notice of your child specifically,
Mhm.
that's how you can tell they're in the green zone. And then maybe you ask them, like, how does your heart feel, right? We
Mhm.
do these kind of body scans at different times of the day, when you're
Mhm.
outside, when you're inside. When my kids were little, we would I traced their bodies on a like a large, I think I did it on like a placemat, not a placemat, tablecloth or something like that. Trace them, and we would do body scans. Like, let's start at the top and work our
Mhm.
way all the way down. How does your heart feel? How does your belly feel? How do your legs feel?
Right.
Guys, let's also talk about how that's teaching adjectives, right? So
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
if that's all you've done today, you have also, like, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about language, they're learning about their body parts and science. Like, we've got it, and we're going to work through together, right? Um, Other things, like, you oftentimes will notice your child's posture, or if they're turning body language, like they're turning away from you, if they're trying to get away, perhaps getting under a table, how we talked about proprioception already, or
Mhm.
between sheets, or
Mhm.
if we see them try to crash into something, that's also trying to give their body that proprioception. So a lot of these things are where they are trying to calm their bodies, and if we don't allow that to happen, then here we are with in that red zone with that major meltdown.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
go ahead. Mhm.
No, no, you were gonna finish your thought. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, like, that building that language, it's a really hard time to do it in the midst of a crisis, but it
Right.
also might be the perfect time, because you can say, "Hey, what zone do you think you were in,
Mhm.
when this happened? What zone do you think you were the next morning? What zone do you think
Mhm.
you are right now?" And you can kind of work through and think about that, or what engine were you, or whichever program that
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
decide to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important what you're saying is because, one of the challenges when you're beginning your homeschool journey is adjusting to a new routine,
Mhm,
adjusting to all the
mhm,
things. Your children are struggling with grief or anxiety. You may be struggling as well, right?
mhm,
And so what you're saying is not only going to be helpful for children, but also helpful for parents to
mhm,
identify, what they're feeling. One of the things I think it's important is to recognize that children and adults, though, do express anxiety and depression differently, right?
yeah,
And so being able to recognize that when they're struggling is also important. Can
Mhm.
either of you speak to what are some of those signs that children or teens may exhibit when they're really struggling that might be different from the parent themselves? So,
mhm,
in other words, they might not recognize it because it doesn't look like how it does
mhm.
when they're feeling anxious or depressed. Sherry
We're
Kay.
both like, wait, what?
Go
What?
ahead,
I
Sarah. Go
know.
ahead, you go ahead.
um, so yes and no. I do agree that for sure that there are different ways that teenagers and that adults kind of emote or display their emotions, and a lot of that has to do with executive functioning. That the front of our brains is the
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex, where we can interpret and then make our decisions on what to do, and that is not fully developed
Mhm.
until adulthood. Right?
Right,
It's
right.
one of the last parts of our brain to develop.
Mhm,
So because of that, it might be a lot harder to decipher between things like anxiety and excitement, right?
Mhm.
Like if you
Mhm.
think about what your body is doing at that time,
Right.
your heart rate's speeding up,
Exactly.
oftentimes you're breathing faster, your pupils can dilate even. All of that's happening because of an emotion, but it's harder to interpret. Am I excited
Mhm.
or am I anxious?
That's right.
And that also comes from life experience where you
Mhm.
would know. And if our teenagers or kids don't have that same experience, they don't
Right.
Right.
necessarily know.
Mhm.
Right.
So I think it's a really good idea to, when we've been talking about some of the connection, is to read books and talk about book characters and
Mhm.
how they're
Mhm.
feeling it in the books and what their reactions are.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can do that with any book,
Absolutely.
how is, Felicity doing in the American Girl doll books? What does she think
Yes.
about, any book? You can do that. Winnie the
Mhm.
Pooh, whatever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so that we can start to again build the language, but it's always easier to interpret how somebody else is
Yes, it is.
feeling and not a real one than point it out in yourself.
Mhm.
Yes.
Sherry Kay, did you have thoughts about that as well?
I just have to say I love that using something else. I think sometimes we know when we've behaved inappropriately afterwards,
Mhm.
and then it becomes shameful, right? Like, I'm not talking
Mhm.
about that. I saw that a lot with one of my kids with when she had behavioral regulation issues. Well, she wasn't going to talk about that because, but when we could talk about it in regards to somebody in a book, and we actually used Lego people, and we built with Legos because that was very
Mhm.
calming for her. So we
Mhm.
would just build, and then we would talk about the Lego people, and
Love
using an
that.
imagination, and then kind of building from there. So that was super super helpful for us. And
Mhm.
Anna, I see that you say that family crisis forced you guys to begin talking about your feelings, and honestly, that's what happened with our family as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
we learned how to do it through that crisis.
Mhm.
We learned to use the Lego people because she could not talk about it for herself. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things about homeschooling is that life doesn't stop so that we can
Mhm.
homeschool. But one of the blessings of homeschooling is that it gives us time and space to cultivate emotional awareness,
Hmm.
to develop language. And that's something that will hold kids and, hold all of us in good stead as they go through life. When they've long since forgotten, the math, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. One of the things that Christy said earlier was we use this program for my son with sensory issues and auditory processing challenges. We had a visual chart and learned language for this early on, starting at age
Love
2.
that. That's the
Perfect.
zones
So
of regulation program. I think that's so
exactly.
cool.
It's
And
yeah.
to kind of pair off, Sherry, what you were talking about with the Lego people, for
Yes.
my son, when we were using the zones of regulation, I had, on the top, the Lego figures have that, like, I don't know what it's called, the one spot right on
Yeah.
their head, right?
Yeah.
So we
For the
had
connection.
a
Hmm.
blue piece, a green piece, a yellow piece, and a
Hmm.
red piece. And so, because a lot of times when you are close to that yellow or red zone, you don't have the
Awesome.
words, like you can't even feel the language. And so I would just hold it up and he would hook,
Hmm.
like he would point at which one it
Hmm.
was. I could carry that thing with me anywhere. It was in my
Hmm.
purse, it was in the car, whatever, and
Hmm.
he could use
Right.
that too.
Yeah. Okay, so Stasia says my boys are having
Perfect.
trouble focusing, and so I looked
Mhm.
into a pediatric psychiatrist for ADHD testing. This doc tests, but also has experience with teens and depression. Do y'all have advice about testing for ADHD? I was diagnosed as an adult 5 years ago. Any thoughts about that, Sarah?
Yeah, I I believe that testing and getting a diagnosis is as helpful as the doors that it opens and the information that it provides. And so if you have a doctor that's going to work through some testing with you and can give you information about your children so that then you can use that to better understand them and to better
Mm,
educate them. Absolutely. Like, and it sounds like
Hmm.
you've got a great spot to do that. Um,
Hmm.
and I would think about, for yourself, since you were diagnosed, 5 years ago, how did that make a difference in your day? Like, you learning about yourself and about how your brain works.
mhm,
So, I
Hmm.
think that as much information that we have so that we can help our kids to understand their brains and their bodies, how they learn, be able to advocate for themselves is a fantastic opportunity.
So with diagnoses or anything, it sounds like the issue is, what are you going to do with it? How will you use that information? How is it going to help you? Right. Sherry Kay, did you
Yeah.
have a thought? I think you were nodding your head.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. The more information you have, the more it helps you set up your homeschool, set up
Mhm.
your lessons, set up how you're going to do things. I know with my daughter, I learned that really the only memory that was really that great for her was if she experienced it through
Yeah.
testing. That's how I figured it out, was through
Mhm.
testing. And so then I was like, oh, so most of our learning took place in museums or with
Mm.
things that she could manipulate, like the Lego dolls. Like
Mhm.
she's not going to remember it if I use pictures, but she'll remember it if she moves it. So you'll get some information like that, and then you take that and translate it into the curriculum that you pick or how you present a lesson or that kind of thing. So
Mhm. So one of the things I hope is clear is that homeschooling can be a path to healing for families, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so what we want to know is, how can parents create a safe, you've already talked about it, so many tips already, but how parents can create a safe and supportive environment for their children as they process the season. So I can think of three areas. One is finding community,
Mhm.
establishing routines, and incorporating activities. You've talked about some of that. Can you address one of those areas or maybe some others that you found helpful, Sarah?
Yeah, I think we've kind of addressed a little bit
Yeah.
of the routine and all that,
Mhm.
but we haven't talked a lot about the occupations, right?
No,
Or the
we have
so how
not.
you occupy your time. So the things
Yes, please do.
that can help you to find meaning,
That's right.
especially in your day. So guys, this is my jam, right? As
Yes,
as
please
you know,
go for it.
I'm all over that. But so what we want to do is look at what our kids need and want to do during their day. So everybody needs to, eat. Everybody needs to go to the bathroom, that type of thing. So we want to start there and make sure that those are healthy things, that we are giving them enough nutrition, that we are giving them enough movement and exercise, that we are getting outside, right? These occupations can really help us to um, make sure that we are regulated enough to be able to try others. Then, since you were mentioning, Carla, some about the community, that's where we want to start to think about, all right, so here's what you need to do. And that might be all you can do for right now, is what you need to do.
Sure.
But there's also, what do you want to do, right? So we
Mm.
can think about what are people that have common proximity or common interests, and that's really where you make good friends and good community. The people who are near you, and then the people who are interested in the same thing. So, what are your children the most interested in, and can we find something that relates to that? Because if you're watching their joy and their interest, chances are you're going to become more regulated with them. So we've talked about self regulation. There's also something called co regulation.
Mhm, mhm.
And you can think about that like when kind of the negative side is easier, right? When you walk into a
Sure.
room and you can feel the tension in there
And
because
then
somebody's
you,
arguing.
yeah,
Yep. And
yeah,
then you're moving right up there too.
exactly. Right.
Yep. That's because our nervous systems we are meant to be in relationship with other
Mhm.
people.
That's right.
It's the same on the flip side of that. Like if we're watching our children in a beautiful situation where they're finding enjoyment in what is happening, we're going to calm ourselves down, right?
Mhm.
So, and then that can carry over to the rest of your day. So if you can think about what things have meaning to you and your children of interest led, then that can also help you as far as your own regulation and getting other things done during the day.
Mhm, mhm. Very good. I noticed that Stacia says, if you have time, would you touch on being a single parent and working while homeschooling? Sherry Kay, do you have
Sherry,
anything to
that's your
share?
jam.
Do you have anything to share with Stacia?
I have a lot to share, and I don't know if we can do it in what we have time left. But
Yeah.
Stacia, I
Give us
am a
the
single
highlights.
mom, and I work full time, and I homeschool. All I have 4 children. They're all adopted, and they all have special needs. So we got this. I, I just want to it doesn't take all day, right? We don't have to homeschool 9 to 3, and it's okay to do it in bits and pieces. So um, the way I do it is I got to know my kid. I my 11-year-old right now homeschools very different than my older daughter did. She's 21 now, um, but she needed to get up first thing in the morning and do her work, and she needed to start and stop and be done. My 11-year-old really needs time in the morning to herself, and she needs to do it in 10 to 15-minute increments. So I actually schedule my work so that I go in, I work first thing in the morning, I get my work done, and then I get her started. She does 10 minutes, I do the dishes. She does 10 minutes. Like, I'm done with my break, we bring her back, we do something. So I think, you know, you just have to kind of figure out what works for your kid and for you and your work schedule. You may need to use some online stuff um, to kind of help you out. That's okay. Maybe you need to use an older child. Maybe you need to use grandma or grandpa or aunts or uncles or a homeschooling team near you. Incorporate that support system that you do have. If you feel like there's not much of a support system, then because I actually live now 12 hours away from my entire support system, I do
Yeah.
have to use some things that are online where I can sit her down and say, okay, I need you to do this while I go and tend to the baby or whatever. So, and know that even if it's only an hour or two, it's okay, you're getting it all done. We also
Mhm.
do a lot of school on weekends. I do a
Mhm.
lot on the weekends, and I also plan my year for a full year rather than just a 9 months because I find that we do all the running as single moms, right? Like I have to do all the doctors, I have to do the inside of the house, the outside of the house,
Mhm.
all the emergencies, like so I find that we end up taking more days off through the school year, but they just get picked up in the summer. So I
Mhm.
try not to put that pressure on myself to get it all done between September and June or September and May or whatever. I go ahead and give myself the whole year. So I think there's, lots of ways that we can do it differently than um, the public schools say that we need to do school. It can be
Mhm.
done, and it doesn't have to be done during the school day. We do a lot of things right before bed or in the
Mhm.
evenings after dinner or whatever. So just give yourself that grace and know that you can do it in bits and pieces throughout the day and use your weekends, use the whole school year, and
Mhm.
take that stress off.
Yeah. It sounds like what we're talking about is rethinking routines and
Yeah.
also reassessing what our expectations are. I think that homeschool parents go into this and we
Mhm.
have these great expectations. We've seen things on Pinterest or, Instagram or whatever, and our homeschool is going to look just like that. And then the reality hits, right? And it never looks that way. So reassessing our expectations. If any of you who are watching, you're listening, if any of this resonates with you and you have any thoughts, then please share them in the chat. But Sarah, one of the things that I think it was Stacia mentioned was having a child who's behind, right? So, what advice or what thinking would you recommend for a homeschool parent who worries about their children falling behind academically?
So, as we're thinking of redefining, definitions or redefining your expectations, I think it's also important to say what exactly is behind, right?
Mm,
So
Mhm.
the majority of our children and are working asynchronously, right? Like not all of their development, motor skills, cognitive skills, social skills are going to be in an upward straight line up and to the right.
mhm,
That just doesn't happen. It's more of a this kind of
mhm,
thing.
mhm,
And especially when we're talking about the um, during a crisis, right? That
mhm,
we're not going to continue to see this great development of here we go, because again, our brains are really focused on what is happening at that point in time. But you're also learning about emotions at that point in time. You're
mhm,
also learning about what your body needs. You're also learning about advocacy, right? And those
mhm,
are the skills that are going to get you farther and farther along.
mhm,
So when we're redefining expectations, I want you to also think about, all right, so what is it that needs to happen? And
mhm,
what does my child specifically need and want to do? Now I
mhm,
see you're saying that he's 17 and probably at a 10th grade level. I see kind of what you're
mhm.
saying there. So 10, like I don't exactly even know what a 10th grade level would mean, right? Is that according to the, standards of learning in a school system? Is that like but what
Who sets
parts,
that
right?
standard, right? Mhm,
Right, who sets that standard, and 10th grade for everything? Like, do we also have strengths as far as, you're outside and you're a lot stronger, or or you can organize your day by yourself, which can get you really far. You know how to ask the right questions, right? So yes, there are important benchmarks for sure, because that's how we know when we need to build a team, find our outside resources, like Sherry was talking about. Like, absolutely, those things are helpful. But we also want to think about, all right, so what are the good things that are happening here? And
Mhm.
how are they continuing to progress? And then will they maybe even pull along some of those other things that were quote unquote behind before.
Mhm. It sounds like
Mhm.
having more of a sort of an open mindset that focuses
Yeah.
on what's positive, what's working really
Mhm.
well. The other thing, Stacia, that I would recommend is to think about what your son wants to do. At the end of high school, what is his path? And focusing on helping him, get to that path. And, if he gets there in the traditional, 12, 4 years of high school, that's great. If he doesn't, then that's particular to him. Even for students who are headed to college, overcoming adversity or anything in that school program that a challenge they had to overcome. That's what colleges are really interested in.
Yep.
That's not a
Mhm.
deal breaker. Sherry Kay,
Mhm.
did you have a thought as well?
No, I mean, I agree with everything that you guys are saying, as well as really, I find that so often, because we're so worried about failing our kids, we
Yeah.
we see those things that they're not doing. And I
Mhm.
think that a lot of times, if we really step back and look at what they are doing and use those skills to bring up those skills that they're struggling with. So really, find those strengths and really just focus on those strengths and keep moving those strengths forward, because those strengths will start to pull the weaknesses along with
Mhm.
them and pull them up without frustrating,
Yeah,
because
that's a
it's really
key.
frustrating when you're always feeling like failing, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm really bad at math, and so we have to do math all day because I'm really bad at math and I'm really bad at math.
I got to get
But
my math
maybe,
skills up, so we got to focus
Mhm.
on that as opposed to,
yeah,
yeah.
but you
Mhm.
feel like you're failing all the time, right? Like,
Yeah.
but if we can focus on our strengths and what we're good at and really keep using that to pull that weakness up, then you don't get as much frustration, and then you actually
Mhm.
do see that weakness start to become less of a weakness.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think that it's really important for development, but also important to maintain that self-esteem and
Mhm.
the motivation to learn and all of those things that we really want in our kids.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to go back to something Anna said a little earlier to your point, Sherry Kay. She said, I am a single parent, homeschooling, working mom as well. It is hard, but it can be done. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Mhm.
Definitely agree with all that Sherry Kay is saying. Yeah, I think being hard on ourselves, I think it comes with the
Mhm.
territory. And I think what we're
Mhm.
hearing is to step back, detach a little bit from that and just see what exactly is going on and what can be done. Um, and so I think that this leads to the question about parents who may be struggling as they navigate this way for self care, right, while homeschooling, right, taking care of themselves. Sarah, can you start with just some thoughts about self care and what parents can do, as they navigate this difficult season of homeschooling?
Mhm. So I want to, since we were talking about redefining, I want to define the term as far as what self care is, because kind of what the media says right now and what our culture says is like, are you getting your wine at night, and are you going out and getting your
Mm,
nails done, and you taking your me
mhm,
time, right?
mhm,
And I'm not saying that those things are all bad. If you're getting your nails done, please get your nails done, right? Like, I am not giving an X on that. But what I am saying is that what we need to think about is what actually helps us to stay regulated. Remember, we've used that term quite a bit here today. And this goes not only physically with our bodies and our brains, but also spiritually, right? So how do you start your day? What are you doing to continue to grow in your relationship and in faith?
mhm,
And so if we are starting there, then as we're moving through, um, it is easier to give, right? Because
Mhm.
we are
Mhm.
being poured into ourselves. So
That's
how
right.
do you start your day? Then also think about how much movement are you getting, right?
Mm,
How much rest and sleep are you getting? Because
mhm.
all of these things are more important so that you can stay regulated
Yeah.
than, am I getting out of my house, and
Mhm.
getting my
Mhm.
me time, right?
Yeah.
There are things that you can do with your children. There are things that you can do without your children. I will tell you that there was during COVID, we were obviously home. Everybody else was home too, but we had already been homeschooling. And then we brought in my husband's grandparents to live with us. And then at that point in time, they were here for 2 weeks, and we found out that my husband's grandfather, right? So grandfather-in-law, whatever, it's like my grandfather too, had pancreatic cancer. And so then we were dealing with all of COVID, pancreatic cancer, hospice in my home with my little kids. And um, there were times that I felt like my skin was going to fall off. Like I was just so like
Mhm.
wired between taking care of everybody. So, what did we do? Like, we had to come up with what can we do with
Mhm.
them?
Mhm.
Like, what occupations were meaningful to
Mhm.
me, to, my grandfather who was at his end of his life, to my children who at that point were between the ages of 4 and 10, and how can we all fit together as a family unit?
Mhm.
And so these are really important questions because they help to keep me regulated enough that then I could provide for all of those other people.
Mhm.
So what it looked
Mhm.
like was a whole lot of gardening because he was a gardener forever
Mhm.
growing up.
Mhm.
A whole lot of cooking together because
Right.
my grandmother was here as well, and so those occupations that had meaning to them, to everybody else around, were more regulating than if I was leaving and getting my nails done or whatever. So just
Mhm.
redefine your terms and make
Mhm.
sure that healthy wise that you are pouring into yourself, but it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean that you have to be getting away.
Mhm. I think,
Absolutely.
Sherry K, I wanna hear what you have to say as well, but one of the things I was gonna say is a lot of times when we take our cues from the culture, often it takes us away from what's really helpful to us in the way that we're wired and the way that we're made. So I think what you
Mhm.
said is really important. Sherry K, you're in the trenches with your kids. So, tell us about self-care.
So for me, it's not that like one, like Sarah was saying, it's not that like one big thing of going out and doing something for me. It's the day to day. I go to bed. My kids go to bed.
Mhm.
I go to bed.
Boom.
I need
Yeah.
sleep. I need
Mhm.
sleep because I
Right.
Mhm.
can't do it without it. So
Yep.
that's where the Grace comes in, my best friend, and takes care of dishes or doesn't. And the dishes just stay, right?
Right.
The
Oh,
dishes just
yeah.
stay and I
Right.
Yep.
go to bed
That's right.
or
Yeah.
whatever. And then I mean, sometimes we have to have our little indulgence and Carla, you know me and my Diet Coke, that's
Oh,
my
yeah.
second best friend.
Yep. Yep, yep,
And
yep.
like sometimes you just have to have something that brings a smile to your face and whatever that might be, if it's a can of Diet Coke or 2 or 3.
Sherry,
I'm
I
just
think we
kidding.
need to get you a shirt that
But,
says "I survive on Grace
finding
and
those
Diet
things
Coke."
on a daily
Exactly. Oh, I
basis.
love that. Yes. Yes, I
Yes,
love that. Yeah.
but it's not one big thing, right? It's those
Yep.
little things and hang out with Grace.
There you
Yes,
go.
yes, exactly. I think one of the things that I like to say is that it's about accepting finiteness, right?
Mhm.
That's it, like we are finite. We try to be everything to everyone, and often we put our needs last. And I think we need to take care of ourselves so that we can
Yeah.
give from fullness and not emptiness. That's going to be different from
Mhm.
for everyone. For
Mhm.
me, it was to take time to journal, spend quiet
Yeah.
time in scripture,
Mhm.
and I think the other benefit of what we're all talking about is to model this for our children. It's so
Yes.
important
Mhm.
that we model this is how we move through difficulty. This is how we move through. This is how we take care of ourselves. This is how we fill ourselves so that we can give and be available to others. It's really important. And then talk
Mhm.
about it. Talk about
Mhm.
it with our kids. Name it. Give them
Mhm.
language that they can incorporate. They may not
Mhm.
even be able to understand it, depending on their ages, but it's something that
Mhm.
they'll observe and they'll take it in, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
And so, one of the blessings of homeschooling is that we're able, it gives us time and space to do that. So
Right.
I noticed that Rayan said, "I am a single mother homeschooling with public schools. However, my child isn't ready to take the STAR test in Texas. Is there anything I can do?" Um, so I don't know if
I know
you're
what
an
that is.
HSLDA. Yeah, I don't. It's one of the standardized achievement tests. And
Yeah.
if you are an HSLDA member, then you can contact your state representative from Texas. They can help navigate you through all of that. So that's a legal question. If you're a member of HSLDA, then we have a great team of lawyers who can help you with those types of things. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we're at the end of our time, unless anybody in the chat has another question for our experts here, our OT and our PT. Um, and while we wait for them to think about anything they might want to share, what are some final words of encouragement that you can share with our viewers today? Sherry Kay, you want to start?
I just want to encourage you to take each day new. You don't have to finish your curriculum in one day, and just one thing at a time, and hang out with Grace and Diet Coke a little bit.
Perfect. Sarah, how about you?
I would say, hopefully that we've kind of leaned into this quite a bit, but you guys, homeschooling does not mean that you're doing this alone. So homeschooling is not alone schooling.
Absolutely.
You are supported. There are lots of resources out there. Sherry was talking about whether it's your family or whether it's that you're using online resources or whatever, like you are not alone. And there's a whole lot of us that are out here ready and willing to be a part of your team as well. So build that, like find out what it is that where you need the support, whether that's in your community that you've got now, at home, or your neighbors, whatever, your church community, however, co-ops, all of that. There's lots of different options, but make sure that you know that you are supported. And here
Mhm.
we are to help you too.
Very good. And Sarah, you also had a couple links you wanted to mention, resources for parents to your podcast, which is the
Mhm.
OT is in. Can you share that with us
Absolutely.
as we end today?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the OT is in podcast is me, and actually Sherry was on with me last week. It's the most recent episode. So if you hop in, you can hear Sherry and I talk a little bit more. But there's almost 50 episodes. It's almost the anniversary here, in 50 episodes
Mm,
that where I really go through and dive in even more on sensory processing, on executive functioning. On my website, there are courses and coaching and consulting and all of that also,
nice.
for all of those topics as well.
Mhm. Yes, and
Great.
those links are in the chat. Thank you.
Yes.
Rand, thank you. She says we will keep growing in wisdom and strength, and that we will, right? That we will.
Amen.
Yes.
So we just want to thank you. I thank you both for being here and sharing your wisdom
Mhm.
with us. Thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget that if you're not a member of HSLDA, we'd love to have you join us. You can go to hslda.org/join, and you can access all of the resources that we mentioned earlier and more at hslda.org/suddenly homeschooling. And in addition to the OT is in podcast, be sure to check out Sarah's website. It's www.homeschoolot.com. And we just want to thank you again for joining us, and we all hope you all have a very good day. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.